And I suppose it's probably fear that might put women off being tested, do you think, Liz?
Fear, mistrust, disinformation, for whatever reason, lack of awareness really of how important it is, and the fact that cervical cancer is difficult to diagnose unless it's caught at a very early stage, and that's why screening is so important. So I think, in my view, one of Vicky's legacies will be to ensure that our sisters, our daughters, our mothers, anybody between the ages of 25 to 60 go for their screening. Improvements have been made already in that the HPV screening is now introduced as part of cervical check. It is a more accurate test, as Robert has said. Screening is not 100% effective. I think people need to be aware of that also, that there will be that percentage of false positives. But that, I think, if people better awareness of how screening works, but real awareness of the absolute importance of going for your regular screening, not just for cervical cancer, for breast, for bowel. And we're also calling for other screening programmes to be introduced ultimately. The European Commission now is just advocating that prostate, lung cancer and gastric cancer screening programmes should be introduced within the European Union. So I think best-in-class screening services need to be introduced, better communication about how those screening services work, how they're available, who is eligible for them. And we, as the Marie Keating Foundation and other advocacy organisations, will continue our work in that regard. But I think the health services themselves, the acknowledgement of of what went on in the past, and then resetting and moving forward and looking to how we can actually adopt that elimination strategy. Look at the likes of Australia and other countries where both with HPV vaccination, with screening and with better treatments and care, that we can look at a world in 30 years where cervical cancer will be eliminated entirely in Ireland.
And looking to the future, Robert, as well, do you think that maybe not just cervical cancer, but do you think maybe we're looking at a future in 30 years' time when cancer might be eliminated completely?
Unfortunately not, I suppose, is the bottom line, but let me qualify that a little bit. We are learning a lot more about cancers, and I suppose we're also learning about the allied areas of research, of behavioural research and that. So as Liz mentioned, this isn't a static space. So there are things that can be done to make sure that everybody is afforded the opportunity for screening. So in cervical screening, there are communities that are quite difficult to engage with, and it's quite an invasive test. I say this hands up as a guy, but it's an invasive test, and there are women who have difficulties, whether from previous trauma or whatever. So there's always opportunities to improve the existing technology and tests. For example, a lot of work around self-sampling at the minute, and there's every indication that will make the test, more comfortable.
Blood work and everything like that.
Blood wouldn't be a great way in this particular instance for technical reasons we probably don't have time to go into here. But back to the wider aspect in terms of all forms of cancer. Cancer is a collective term. It's like talking about animals. There are lots of different types of it, lots of different causes, lots of different contributors. We now know that viruses and infectious agents contribute globally to probably close to 1 in 5 cases of cancer. So much like HPV causing cervical cancer, we know that a virus people will be very familiar with, although its name is quite technical, the Epstein-Barr virus, often called glandular fever, contributes quite a lot to lymphoma burden in the world, and vaccines have been developed against it. Liz mentioned about gastric and duodenal cancer. We know that there's a nasty bug that up to half of us can carry in our stomachs, which can cause that, and it can be very easily treated with antibiotics. So there are lots of opportunities to impact there. We have lots of opportunities in terms of prevention. In the first place, we know tobacco is still by far the biggest killer in the world, not just in cancer numbers. And yet, in many countries, moves to eradicate the burden of tobacco ill health and disease are quite stagnated at the minute, in part due to the costs and in part due to the influence of tobacco companies and their interests. So there's no one single solution, there's no one single treatment, there's no one single screening program, but there are a lot of things that are happening at the minute that suggest that really there's a lot of hope and opportunity for the future. And I suppose our engagement with those opportunities, our investment in research, our understanding of those things and how they impact us will be really important in getting the best opportunity out of that.
Okay.